All right, ready to rock and roll, guys. Thank you.
All right, well, for those of you just joining, I'm Kara. I'm in David Putnam's lab, and I'm a first-year student, and I'm working on developing surgical biomaterials, also kind of with a drug delivery focus.
Yeah. So I'm Mariella. I'm also from David Putnam's lab, and I work on doing, essentially on designing new vaccines.
And I'm Nathaniel Wright. I am in Yudong Wang's lab, and I work on controlled delivery of immunotherapeutics for the treatment of melanoma. And I'm a first year as well.
No, I'm a second year. I don't think I mentioned. Yeah. So Belinda, is there anything specific we should focus on, or should we just open it to questions, or what should we do?
Go ahead and open to questions. This is just an open forum, just FAQ. If there's, somebody has a question or they can't talk, there's a chat at the bottom. You are more than welcome to post, so watch the chat at the bottom. Some students may be in labs, I would imagine at this point, probably not, but feel free, guys. I mean, get to know each other too, so feel free to ask questions. This is what it's all about. And if they don't ask questions, you guys can talk a little bit about your lab and get another perspective. You guys didn't sit on the other panel, so feel free to ask away.
So does anybody have questions?
I have a question. So at Cornell, do you do lab rotations, or is it more a direct match system? Or is it kind of both?
So it's definitely not direct matching. So it's not going to be a situation where you have to identify your PI right now and commit to them. But I think personally the rotation system here is really nice because it's really flexible. So I know at some schools, like, you have to do 8 weeks of one rotation, then 8 weeks of a second rotation, and they have to be consecutive, and then you have to make your decision after that time. But here it's really worked out on an individual basis. So for instance, I rotated in 2 different labs at the same time, and then I was sort of like attending meetings for a third lab all consecutively. And so I could determine like the level of involvement that I wanted to have, and the PIs really sort of see it as a way for you to get what you need to make your decision. So they're not necessarily going to pressure you to make a full-time commitment to lab work during that rotation period. It's more just for you to kind of get the insight that you need. And so I did 2 rotations and then made my decision kind of end of November. Some students decided earlier than that, and some students didn't even really rotate, they just knew. But I think the flexibility of making that decision is really nice, because at the end of the day, the lab you choose is kind of like the biggest determining factor of how your PhD is going to go. And so I think the system here is set up in a way to let you make that decision in the best way possible.
Yeah, and it's only for the first semester, which is something that I also liked, because you didn't, for example, if you find a lab right away that you really like, you don't have to wait the whole year to be able to officially join. So if you really mesh with someone, then you can join. Some people, for my cohort, some people already super early knew who they were. Other people took until December to really join, but you don't have you don't have to wait for the whole first year to be able to settle down.
And to the student who just wrote in the chat about expectations for what to produce, I think that really depends on the lab that you're rotating in. For me, there were no expectations. It was more just I could do whatever I needed to do to get a feel for what the work was like. And there wasn't an expectation that at the end of 6 weeks, I would have these solid results or a report written or whatever. But I do know that in some other labs, it was slightly more formalized. But I'd say overall, the philosophy here surrounding rotations isn't for the PIs to get some mini project done and to offload that work. It's more to help you make an informed decision.
It's definitely, on the most part, allowing you the chance to try things out in the lab and see if you like the mentoring style of the PI. If they're giving you a small project and you enjoy how they're able to help you with that or direct you, or maybe it's very individualized and it's kind of you're on your own and you need to figure things out. So it gives you a chance to experience that a little bit, and that really helps you make an informed decision on what lab you want to join.
When did you decide which labs you wanted to rotate in, or did you kind of wait until you got to campus and like kind of chose then?
So I was emailing some professors before I got to campus about rotating when I got here. So it's pretty open to start rotations right as soon as you get to Ithaca. Even some people, you can start rotating before the semester starts technically. So it's kind of up to you on that.
But I would say there's not like a pressure for you to have that all arranged before you get here. Like I didn't have any arranged before getting here. There was one professor I was really interested in, and I had emailed him beforehand, but there was nothing like set up or official. And then the lab I actually ended up joining, I didn't email that professor until I got here. But I would say that you want to have a pretty good idea of who you might be interested in before you come here, just for the sake of making the decision, because you want to make sure you choose a school where there are a handful of faculty that you think you'd be interested in. But it's certainly not a situation where you're like competing with other students to set up rotations in June or something like that.
Yeah. And since it's pretty flexible, so nobody, like not everybody does it, all rotations at the same time. Like some rotations are longer than others. Some people just do shadowing. So it's like not like a project. So it's not like, say, you have to have already a rotation set up like at the first day of class and then have something in 6 weeks. So it's like do shorter, longer. And since it's pretty flexible, not everyone is like, like not everyone's moving in the same blocks. There's some fluidity there. So you don't have to be like super like, all right, I'm going to do this one and this one and this one and already have it set up from day one.
And I see a student just asked about transitioning research areas. So I made a pretty major switch in research areas. And that was something I was a little bit concerned about because all of the faculty that I was interested in represented different research areas, and none of those areas was the one I came from. But pretty much the universal consensus from all the faculty and students that I talked to when I came here was that it doesn't matter what your research background is in, it matters what you're interested in, because, graduate school is kind of the time for you to develop that expertise, and so they're not expecting you to come in with it. So I'm in the process of like learning the new area, and it's definitely a learning curve, but I would say my PI has been super supportive. And the nice thing about the program here is that we don't have super strict class requirements. So I'm free to identify the classes that I think will help me be more prepared for my specific research area, and I can go out and take them, and I'm not spending all my time taking classes that are for a different like part of BME. And so I think the program is definitely set up to support you if you're going to make a transition to a new field.
I'd agree with that it's very much open to you, and it's like you're not kind of shoehorned into something that you worked on in the past. You kind of get to feel it out. And again, the PIs are very open to work with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you guys ask about funding opportunities before starting rotation? It's like, can a PI take student without having enough funding, or you just have to ask about it?
That's definitely a conversation you want to have, because if a PI doesn't have funding and they're not going to be able to take you, then you don't really want to spend your time rotating with them. But that being said, like there's a lot of different funding avenues. So like technically my PI doesn't have funding for me right now, but I'm acting as a TA, so I get funding from that. And so it's not like if they don't have a grant in place for a student that it's impossible for you to join, but you definitely need to have those conversations early on and be straightforward about it, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you've been rotating for a few months and then they don't have funding and they can't take you. So, but everyone who is accepted into the Cornell program and comes here is guaranteed funding. So there's not going to be a situation where you just don't get paid. It's just a question of where it comes from. But yeah, those are definitely important conversations to have early on.
Yeah, and so there's all sorts of different ways. Like Kara, you could be like TAing, or your professor could have a grant, or you could come in with a fellowship. Like I have a fellowship. It's definitely like professor dependent. So some professors just like won't take people in if they don't have spots. Some professors are more more open. Like even if you don't have, they're like trying to figure it out. And you'll But you're like pretty much like Kara said, like guaranteed. Like it's gonna come from somewhere. It's just like mostly if the PI is willing to like take you in without something solid in place, essentially. And so I can go with the next question, like how would you describe lab culture and mentoring styles over labs and PIs? So Kara and I are in the same lab. It's like a medium-sized lab, I would say. There's 6 of us. At least for us, we have weekly lab meetings. They're like had in normal time, and one-on-one meetings. And Dave is pretty available. Like even if he's not physically in the lab, you'll like email him, but at the same time, he's like not breathing down your neck or like pretty or like super onto it. Also in the lab we're in, it's like shared space between like 4 other labs. So even if like we can't reach Dave or like we need something from some other lab, we can like, there's like a whole community there where we can like reach out and ask other people or like see if somebody else has a different way of seeing it.
And I'd say as far as our lab culture goes, I think we have the fun lab.
Yeah.
That's a good time. And I think Dave is a really good combination of being available, like Mariella said. Like he's even come into the lab and put gloves on and shown me techniques, but he's hands off in that he is totally supportive of us kind of like trying things and experimenting and coming up with our own ideas. And so I think that's a really nice balance, but that's certainly something that varies from PI to PI. I think like generally speaking, the PIs who have been here longer are probably going to be a little more hands off. And I know there's a handful of new faculty members that are joining Cornell. And in the pre-tenure phase, I think like generally speaking, you can expect a PI to be a little bit more hands-on. But again, that depends from person to person.
Yeah, and so my lab is and PI, they're very hands-off and so our lab culture is very open to help and very collaborative in that sense. Like if I need help, I can go to someone else in the lab and ask them and they'll be able to help me if they've worked in the same area. As far as, I don't meet with my PI regularly, maybe like once a month, depending. He's very hands-off and kind of lets you do your thing. And then but if I ever need help, I'm able to like email him and say, I need to ask you a question about this. And he's very open and willing to do that. And he'll respond very quickly, same day, always. But it's very much kind of let yourself grow and like develop something on your own in my lab.
Yep. So, other questions?
So I can address this because I wanted to join Larry Benasser's lab and 8 other students wanted to join Larry Benasser's lab. And that was really stressful at first. So I remember coming in and kind of expressing all my concerns to the other graduate students, and they were like, it always works out. Every year it works out. Don't stress about it. And I was like, whatever, it's not going to work out. There's so many of us trying to join this one lab. And at the time, it felt definitely stressful. But, you know, Larry just kind of started out with the shadowing phase. And so we were all like coming into the lab and watching experiments together. And then as time progressed, like more and more students identified other research opportunities that they ended up being more interested in. And it's funny because, you know, I ended up getting an offer from Larry's lab, but then at that point had decided that I wanted to join Dave's lab instead. So there may be a situation where a lot of you want to join the same lab, but I know it sounds like a platitude, but it really does all work out and everyone sort of finds their home. And the great thing about Cornell is that there's so many amazing faculty here and the new ones that are coming in that you're going to find a good place for you. And it just kind of takes some time to like actually get in the lab and get that experience to know what's going to be right for you. And I think that Larry's lab would have been amazing, but I've been super happy in Dave's lab and I'm really glad that things worked out the way it did. And as far as the co-advising thing, I would say that's doable. I have a cohort member who also joined Dave's lab, but he's sort of like co-advise with Larry. But that can be varying levels of like official. So like my friend's primary PI is Dave, but I think he gets some funding through Larry. And then of course, Larry's going to be on his committee. I will say that the sentiment I've gotten from students who are full on co-advised is that it's sort of like twice as many emails and you need to get twice as many approvals and you have to go to twice as many meetings. So that's something to definitely think hard about before you decide to do it. But I think the department is open to it for sure.
And another way
Yeah, go ahead.
to deal with that is if you have someone that you want to be an advisor as well, is you can put them on your committee. So that way you can still get like advice from them and get some of their guidance, but without having to worry about like fulfilling all the parts that one advisor has twice.
Yeah, like I'm like I only have one advisor, but like right now I'm working a lot with one of my committee members. So I'm like kind of co-advised in the sense that I'm working at both labs, but I'm not officially co-advised. So even if you're not officially co-advised, some PIs are like some PIs are pretty open to like having you like working with them, especially if like they're in your committee and working with them like pretty closely as if they were like co-advised. And to with the next question, like how often we attend conferences in each of our labs. At least in Dave's lab, he like takes us on at least one conference a year. Like this year we went to Utah, that's the full name of the conference, Drug Delivery.
Biomedical materials.
Yeah, it was a pretty small conference, but it was in in the University of Utah where he did his PhD. And so like we went there, and like I mentioned, like every year he kind of takes, like at least for his lab, he like says like, oh, I'm going to take you to a conference each year. I'm assuming like other labs are like different rules or like have different ways of looking at it.
And Justin asking about, oh, sorry, Nathaniel, were you going to say something?
As far as my lab goes, it's pretty open as far as like where you are in your work. He'll let you like attend conferences once, like every year, every other year, depending on like how your work's going, if you have something to present and that type of thing. So it's kind of dependent on a case-to-case basis.
Just to address Justin's question about collaboration, I think that's another thing that depends on the lab that you're in, but I'd say that in general, Cornell is a very collaborative environment. We have collaborations with the medical school in New York City and with the vet school and across departments, like in the chemistry department or the chemical engineering department. And so I think this is definitely a place that you can do that. But again, it really depends on your lab. Like some labs will have long-standing collaborations, and working on those can be sort of similar to being co-advised. Some labs, maybe like if there's a collaboration that you want to start, you could propose that. But I'd say in general, the department and the environment is very open to that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if I'm interested in exploring a research topic or project that API is not currently exploring but may explore, are faculty members open to exploring different research paths or different aspects to what they already do on campus?
So that's very dependent on the funding of the PI as well as the PI himself or herself. Because in order to fund that project, they need their grants, and based on their grants, they'll be able to fund it or not. So it's kind of, if it's close enough to their work that they can say, this grant will cover that, or if it's too far away from that, they won't be able to work with you. Or maybe they're like, in the future, we can do this, but for now, I need you to work on this for a year, and we'll get this grant out, and then we will work on that. So it's very case dependent for that.
And that's where having your own funding can make a huge difference. Like if you get the National Science Foundation grant, or if you have some other grant that's external, then you have a lot more freedom. But I think it depends on the PI. I mean, like even with Dave, he's super open to me sort of doing whatever I want. And like within the constraints of it being like biomaterials related, but he's very open to exploring your own ideas and sort of developing as a researcher in that way. But like, for instance, if you're with a brand new PI, they might be more interested in you completing a specific project that's kind of more within their area of expertise. So it really depends. And that's something that you would want to talk to with faculty on an individual basis, I think.
Yeah, at least with Dave, if it's equipment and materials that the lab already has, but you're just using it like in a different way, he's pretty open. And I think it's safe to assume that if it's something that's like not going to take up a ton of time and it's not going to be super expensive and you want to like at least give it a try, I think PIs might be pretty okay with that.
For Andrew, who asked about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Nathaniel.
So basically, Andrew, what made me choose Cornell was I really liked the environment here, and like the students are very friendly. It's kind of hard to tell that over a Zoom conference. Like you won't be able to get that in as much as in person, but they really are.
Yeah, I would echo that. So I'm from Montana, and I was like, I'm not going to the East Coast, and I had all but decided I was going to go to the University of Washington. But I came here on the visit anyways because, free visit. And I was just so impressed by how interested the students were in me and how interested the faculty were. I didn't feel like I needed to impress anybody. Like they all were just really interested in where I had come from and what my goals were for my PhD. And the current graduate students treated me like someone that they would actually be friends with. And were so like generous with their time. And I really had a hard time making the decision. So the girl that I'd been paired with as my mentor, I called her on the phone like 3 times over the course of making my decision to ask her more and more questions. But I just feel like this culture and this department in particular are really supportive and have a great sense of community. And I think this whole coronavirus thing has really brought that to light because the sense of community and the outpouring of support from the faculty and staff and from the students for each other has really been, I think, remarkable and kind of shows why this is a special place. And so it's really unfortunate that you can't come here and experience that for yourselves. But I think that sense of community combined with kind of the limitless resources that Cornell has, and Ithaca is a beautiful place to live too. I think I think it's really a special place.
Okay, so we're gonna pause just a moment. I do have to echo, this coronavirus really does stink because I miss you guys, my current students. So looking forward to meeting everybody because that is like the best thing of my job is I sit here and I work and on all these names and I see all these names. It is at least nice to see your faces. It is such a bummer because I was really hoping and praying that we could pull this off. So we're gonna move over. So the 2 o'clock, I'm down to 3 more schedules to do. So if you don't have your schedule, everybody should have their schedule by now, but 3 people. I worked literally around the clock to try to get this thing off the ground. I actually had to move literally my office into my house. So bear with me as you might hear children and dogs and God knows what else is gonna happen today. So I've got 13-year-olds that are also going through this whole change with us. Oh, did I lose you guys?
No.
My internet is kind of iffy because they're also streaming for their classes too. So we're going to move over to the next session, which is let me pull up the schedule. We have the tissue engineering team and the systems team going off next. So if you guys are interested in that one, you guys can log on to that link and then we'll meet you guys over there.